Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 18th of June, 2023. Happy Father's Day to the fathers out there. And let's jump into our agenda, see what we've got going for today. First off, we have a new lighting course we can now officially call our school, Learn Light and Sound. First lighting course, we've been putting up courses since 2015, and delighted that Em and I were able to put this one together with lots of support from Danny as well, who's also our technical director today. Thanks, Danny, for that. There's her. You can't see her, but just off camera here. So you can find that over at learnlightandsound.com, or sorry, school.learnlightandsound.com. And actually, if you're signed up at the school already, I'll be sending out a coupon for each of you shortly after the live stream here. So if you want to hold on for that, we'll get you a little discount there. All right, today we're going to talk about learning your gear, and I think it's really important.
Can people sign up at the school?
Danny is asking if people can sign up at the school. Yes, of course. You just go to school.
It's the email list that gets the coupon?
Yeah, everyone on the email list gets the coupon. So school.learnlightandsound.com. And if you are signed up there and you opt into the email list, and the only time I send out emails is when we launch a new course. I'll send one soft sale. It's no hard sales around here. And then each week before the live stream here, we send out a little reminder with the topic for the week. And also you can just reply to that email if you want to put a question on the agenda that we'll cover a little later on today or any week. All right, so we're going to talk about learning your gear. Really, really important for a couple of reasons. Number one, well, we'll talk about that in just a minute. But after we're done with that little segment here, we're going to just do a little conversation there, dive in a little bit in this particular case to the Sound Devices 888 to get a glimpse into some of the types of settings that you need to be familiar with. And this is going to apply to almost any audio recorder. Obviously, this one has more features, more flexibility, more routability or rootability, depending on the part of the world you're from. But I think a lot of this still applies across the board. It's always good to have this kind of skill and knowledge. So we'll do that. We'll come to the questions. There were several questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then we'll go to the chat and see what we've got going in the chat. So what are we even talking about here? Why is there a topic called Learn Your Gear? And there's a reason why. When you are recording, there are probably millions of things that can possibly go wrong. It can be challenging, and I've often advocated for testing. So every week we do a kind of a miniature test before the live stream. We just do a quick run through. We still miss things. Last week we missed something. We had our camera set incorrectly. The color, the white balance was off, and so things looked a little weird last week. We didn't catch that, but caught it this week now. Testing, but another part of that is not only testing ahead of time before the actual show or before the actual recording, but also you really have to learn what your gear is capable of so that you can troubleshoot if you do need to troubleshoot. So if you are running, if you're especially if it's a live event of some sort, a live show, you have to be able to troubleshoot very quickly, or you may not be invited back to be the sound engineer again. So it's a really, really important skill to have. And of course, understanding how your gear works and all of its settings, where to find them, how to change them, what could potentially be the issue if you find yourself in a situation where something's not working. Being able to understand how your gear works gives you the superpower of being able to solve those problems very, very quickly, which is really, really important. So, of course, it's critical you understand what all the settings are, what they do, and I think it's just worthwhile on some Sunday afternoon, if you haven't already and you have a recorder, I would recommend going through the menus and making sure you understand where everything is, what it does, experiment with it. Push buttons, test recordings, and see what happens. So let's jump in. Let's go over to the Sound Devices 888 here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand up. It's a little easier for me to access it. So we'll go ahead and switch over here. And I'm going to mute for just a second while I reposition my microphone so I don't get a bunch of noise that way. 1 second. Okay. All right, this is the sound device is 888, and I just want to walk through a few things here. Again, I realize not everyone's working with this exact recorder or one of its siblings, but I think I just want to run through some examples of the types of things that it's important to understand or useful to understand to making sure that you can adapt quickly. There's some shortcuts. We'll come back and look at this. Well, actually, we'll look at some of those as we go along, but you'll notice here as I have basically two control knobs. I have one on the left and one on the right here. And you'll notice when I move this one, there's a little white box that moves around between the different channels. So here it's up on the mix. Now it's on channel 1, now it's on channel 2. But you might think to yourself, why can't I go to channel 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8? And the reason is because they're not on. And the way you turn them on the 888 and the 833 and the Scorpio is first you have to turn on the trim knob. Now that I've done that, now I can go to channel 3. And what I can do here with a shortcut is I can hold down this button, for example, on channel 3 and then press in on the encoder. And now that channel is armed. When they're red, that means they're armed, which means that when you press record, this channel will be recorded. Now, if I didn't have that on, if I had a microphone routed into channel number 3 here, and I had it trimmed up, I had the gain applied, it would be contributing signal to the stereo mix, but not, to the stereo mix. And so if I wanted to make sure I want to record the stereo mix as well, again, the same thing, press and hold the arm button, press down on this button. Now the stereo mix is armed. So right now, if I press record, the channels that I'll see in my poly wave file, I'll get one wave file. It'll have the left channel, the left stereo channel, the right stereo channel, channel 1, channel 2. It will not record channel 3, even though it's on right now. But what it will do is it will record any audio that comes into channel 3 into the stereo mix here. With everything else, it gets routed to the stereo mix, which by default are all of the microphone channels. So that's an interesting thing to understand and to know. Another way you can do the inverse of that too, what we could do is come down here and we could just arm channel 3. But if we didn't want any of channel 3 to go to the stereo mix, I just take my fader and turn that to 0. So now channel 3, it'll be recorded to an isolated channel at whatever gain level you've set here with your trim knob, but it won't contribute any of its audio to the stereo mix. So there are some things there worth knowing. Were you raising your hand?
Yes.
Danny was raising her hand. She has a question.
You said something turned red, but I only see orange.
Well, it may be coming through as orange on the camera here. Technically, I think maybe it's a red-orange, let's say.
What, can you point to the part that...
Yeah, so the armed part is where it has a channel number. There's what appears to me to be kind of a red-orange box. That means that channel is armed.
Wow, it's even changing as you're...
Yeah, the camera and the lights may be kind of pulsing a little bit.
Okay,
yep.
Thanks.
All right, so that answers that question. So that's one thing that you can keep in mind. So why would you ever want to do that? Why would you want to record channel 3, but not include it in the stereo mix? Well, I think a good example of that is that when I'm doing location sound or working on a set, sometimes if I'm sending audio to a director, for example, I might only want to send them the boom mic. I might not want to send them anything else. And there are a couple of ways you can do it. You can do it like I just described here, although that's probably not the most intuitive way to do it. That's a way you could do it. But there's another more important way, I think a better way to do that, and that is to actually come to the outputs menu. So that's one of the things with these higher end recorders that you get a lot of flexibility. First of all, you get a ton of outputs. So here I have a left and right stereo output. Those are full-size XLR connectors. Then I have outputs X1 through X8. So I have another, an additional 8 outputs. So a full 10 outputs there on the side of the recorder over here. So I can choose what gets sent to the director's headphones if I have a wireless transmitter set up here and then a receiver for the director to wear, or a producer or whomever. And since I'm sending them just mono, excuse me one second. Sorry about that, just a little cough there. I can send them just mono here. So for example, I can come in here and I can choose what we send to them on that particular mono transmission that they're going to get. For them, while they're on set, mainly what they're looking for, usually in my experience, is they just want to make sure that they're monitoring the performance more than anything else. If you're talking about a director, they just really want to make sure that performance is right. And for all of the dialogue that we're recording, mono is fine. So usually in that case, what I'm going to do then is that I might just send even just the left mix. If I'm not panning anything, then I'm just going to send them the left mix, and that's just fine. So that's going to be everything that's sent to the mix. Or if I wanted to, I could say, you know what, I'm just going to send them the post fader channel 1. My boom microphone is on channel 1. I'm just going to send them the boom microphone. That's all I want them to hear, because if I send them the boom microphone plus all of the lavalier microphones that all the talent are wearing, what's going to happen is not at least 50% of the time, often more, the lavalier microphones are going to be out of phase with the boom microphone. And so it's going to sound sort of disorienting and phasey and comb filtered. So a lot of times I prefer not to send all of that to the director.
It will sound bad.
It'll sound plain and simply bad. So that's why I oftentimes, if I am going to send a wireless feed, I will send usually just the boom microphone like that. Now, if you're filming a scene where there is no boom microphone, or you have two boom microphones, then you might want to route both of those boom microphones. So for example, if I had them on, here's the thing though, you can only do one or the other. This is where things get a little bit interesting. So this is where I might actually set up a bus, and I might have the boom microphone bus where I can route both of the boom microphones to that bus. And that way then I can send them bus number 1. So let's actually go do that. So instead of this, I'm going to set this one back to left mix for now. But let's come back out here. If I come into channel number 1, let's say this is my boom microphone. It actually says Curtis's boom. Good. All right, so we can come in here, and this is where the audio gets routed to. So if I want to go to bus number 1, I can send this at 0 dB. Just say we're going to just pretend the fader's or we're setting the fader essentially from this channel to bus number 1 with the fader set to 0 dB, meaning any levels that we apply with our trim here, that's exactly what's going to be sent to bus number 1. Okay, so I can pop back out. Then I come into channel 2. Let's say this is our second boom microphone. I can come down here and I can do a similar thing. I can also send this to bus number 1 at 0 dB, as if I have the fader set to unity or 0, meaning send all of this channel. Don't adjust the channel, send the entire channel level to bus number 1. Then what I can do is I can come back into the outputs menu. Now for my left output, what I can do is say, you know what, let's send bus number 1 instead to that wireless transmitter that's going to the director. Now the director will hear boom mics 1 and 2 from channels 1 and 2. So that's what the buses on something like this, like an 888 or an 833. I'm sure the Zaxcom recorders, field recorders have that as well. Certainly the Aton Kantar has that as well. So when you get up into the higher level field recorders, those are the types of things that they enable. All right. Now, there are some other things here that are, I think, useful to understand as well. If you are going to use the auto mixer, say, for example, you have a panel discussion for a podcast that's on the road, perhaps, it's important to understand how to turn the auto mixer on, first of all. And first, we're in the main menu here. We just went to the auto mixer menu, and here we can, of course, choose which auto mix algorithm we want to use, whether it's Dugan, or we can use the Mix Assist, which is the Sound Devices flavor. But let's use Dugan. And then, of course, I just have to either enable it or disable it. Right now it's disabled. Now it's enabled. We can choose that we want to go ahead and turn on the ring indicators. They're purple now, which means that the auto mixer is enabled. And then we can choose which channels we want to include in the auto mix. And you see, as soon as I selected channel 1, this one lit up. It's purple now, much brighter. And I can say, okay, I want to include these 3 channels in my mix, in my auto mix. Now, if I pop back out you can see there's actually level coming into these two. There's actually not any coming in here on channel 3 yet. And actually, if I go to channel 3, one of the things I want to do is I have not enabled auto mix in the channel as well. So now that I have, and I pop back out, actually, let's see what's going on here. Pop back out. Okay, we're just not getting anything in that channel there. I'll see if I gain up now, we will. So those purple indicators are indicating how much of the overall shared gain across these 3 channels each of those channels are getting. You can see if I turn this down, meaning, okay, there's not as much signal coming in to channel 2, it's not giving it any of the gain. It's not sharing the gain with that input at the moment, which is exactly how auto mix works. So that's how you do that. Now I can also just go into the channel menu and disable auto mix, say, hey, I want to pull this channel out of the auto mix. Now it's no longer in there. Now it's just going to be treated like it normally would be. Anytime someone talks into it, anytime they're not talking and there's noise being captured by the microphone, that's all going to come in on channel 1. So that's how it's important to understand how that works as well so you can troubleshoot any issues. I'm going to go ahead and turn auto mix off for all of those channels right now. All right. Other things about the channels it's really important to understand as well. If, for example, you have a microphone set up and you're not getting any audio in on it and you're not sure why, it should be based on the understanding of how you've set it up. One thing about the more pro level recorders is they're fully routable, meaning if I plug a microphone into channel number 1 over here on this side of the mixer, I can bring that into channel. I can actually assign that to any channel I want to. So, for example, if I have, for whatever reason, channel number 4, I wanted that to be the one that controls the physical input number 1, I could actually set it up to do that. So I'm going to pop back out to my menu here, go into the channel 4 input. Right now it's taking its audio from mic input number 4, but let's change that. Let's say, you know what, I want to actually get the audio from channel or physical input number 1. And now when I pop back out, that's where it's going to get that, is from input number 1. And you can actually send the same physical input to multiple channels if you wanted to. So, for example, you've seen that there's a feature on some of the more prosumer recorders where you can, in essence, do a safety track recording. You could do that. You could apply less gain to channel 4 than you are to channel number 1, which are both taking input from physical input number 1, and then you have kind of a safety track. Not that you'd probably do that on here. I mean, you could, but you've got a limiter working in your favor as well, so you may not need to do that. But that's just an example of how flexible these kind of things are. Normally, I would just leave that at 4, but if you're not getting audio, that's a really good thing to know, is if you're thinking, okay, I have a microphone connected up to input number 4 here, but I'm not getting any audio. Why is that? If I come into my channel 4 menu here, I can go, oh, that's why, because right now I'm taking audio from mic input number 1. So let me change that to number 4 where I was expecting it to come in, and now that solves that problem. So there are a lot of things to keep track of when you have that much flexibility with your routing. So you just need to know where to go to capture those kind of potential mistakes that are pretty easy to make, actually. But that's another, I think, a common one that people will run into. Another thing that I think is important to understand too is I've seen this a lot. Actually, on the 8 series recorders, we have an 833 at work that we use, and every once in a while we get this really weird effect where suddenly it's like the audio is being picked up from an additional microphone, and that's because someone came into the main screen and actually turned on the Slate microphone, and so you can actually turn it on like that. So a quick tap turns it on and off, or a long hold will just capture a couple seconds and then stop capturing when you let go. But often what happens is someone has bumped that, and now that audio is being captured by the Slate mic, which is just a little microphone. I think there's don't remember exactly where it is, but it's just right here on the front of the mixer sometimes, and then suddenly they're getting this and kind of freaking out. What's going on? Why am I getting this extra audio that I don't want? It's often that Slate microphone. Okay. All right. Another thing that's important too that I've seen a lot is when people put on headphones for the first time and they have not, maybe the faders are down or something like that. But anyway, they put on headphones and they're not hearing what they would expect to hear. So making sure that you're using the right preset, headphone preset, is going to be really helpful as well. By default, it's usually set to left-right stereo. But I also have another preset over here where I can listen to the isolated channels. And let me just show you where you set those up. So again, you come to the Outputs menu, down to your headphone presets. And here is where you can set your headphone presets. So you can define what gets sent to each of the headphone presets. So if in some cases you do want to listen to the left-right stereo, you've got that option, of course, and you can define exactly what's included there. Actually, no, that one's a default one. You don't get to choose what's included there. But down on the custom presets, you can definitely edit it and choose. So here, for example, my headphone preset, and this is a pretty common use case for me, is that if I've got 4 inputs, I've got a boom microphone and 3 lavaliers. This is how I'll set it up. I just want to hear in my case, I just want to hear the isolated channels. So I don't want the fader levels to, well, actually I can change it. Here, currently it's set to post fader. And that's another thing. You can set it to what you get in the headphones is either pre-fader or post-fader. So if you don't want the fader knob to affect how much of that particular microphone input you're hearing, you can choose pre-fader. That'll be green. And then if you want to hear the effect of the fader, if you do want it to take into account whatever fader setting has been made, then you would press it again to get it to the orange set. So right now what I'm listening to is I'm listening to channel 1 post fader, channel 2 post fader, channel 3 post fader, and channel 4 post fader. Then I can also come over here to the right headphone, and this is weird because this is actually currently set up for all of those to be listened pre-fader. I'm going to go ahead and change those to post fader as well. Now there are other things you can do as well. So here, for example, I in fact want to hear just my lavalier microphones over, actually, technically, I would typically do it this way. I want to hear my boom microphone in my right ear, just for personal reasons. And then in my left ear, I might want to hear just the lavalier microphone. So now I've turned off my boom microphone on channel 1 in my left ear, and I'm hearing the lavaliers post fader in my right ear. And then when I come over here to the headphone right settings, I'm hearing just my boom microphone, channel 1, in my right ear. And that's often how I set things up when I'm doing a job where we have multiple channels of wireless coming in. All right, with that, let's see if we've got any questions or comments in the chat. Let's just go ahead and leave this. Well, actually, let me go readjust my microphone 1 second. Okay, Danny's going to take a look in the chat for us here, see what's happening there. And make sure that you're all still with us here. Do you use a pre-flight checklist or do you run through from memory? So typically, I would say for bigger jobs, I would want to do a pre-flight checklist, but my jobs are usually pretty small. So I usually run through it from memory, but I do testing first. So I've got all my lavs, all my wires, as they call them. I don't know why they call it wireless microphones. They call wires. Go get people wired up. But I'll typically have all those set up. I will have tested all of them, making sure they're all coming through to the mixer okay, that they're sounding okay on the headphones, and same with the boom microphones. So I'll check all that ahead of time. Have that ahead of time. So I don't usually use a pre-flight check. And again, in my case, almost never using more than 1 or 2 channels. Rarely using more than 1 or 2 channels of wireless. So for me, it's not a big deal. But if you get a bigger, I think if you're working on a bigger production, and I've heard of production mixers talking about, hey, I had 18 channels of wireless. I think in those cases, a pre-flight checklist is probably a good idea. On the 8 series, I find setting the headphone level a little tricky. The tone level at -20 does not match with ISO tracks level as it did with the 6 series. Am I missing something? I don't know. I don't understand the question, to be honest. So if we go back over to the 888 here really quickly, so I've turned the tone on here, you can see. Let me just turn it off for a second, but you can turn on the tone, and you can see it's sending the tone at minus 20 dB to all of the channels, and also to the left-right mix. So I don't know what your question means exactly. If you want to email me and clarify a little bit more, I'd love to take a look at that and happy to answer that. Or if you can clarify here, let's come back to that and take another look at it. Okay. Robert, I use a pre-flight checklist for my gear that starts with a factory reset, then it then just has the factory settings I want to change. This way you know how the device is configured. Actually, I take that back. So we have done presets for our 833 at work. It doesn't capture everything. It captures most of the things that you can set in the menus. What it doesn't capture, for example, the trim or the fader levels, of course. But yeah, that's helpful. And we've actually had to use that on multiple occasions where we went and did something a little bit different than usual. Being able to call up that preset again and get it reset back to the standard settings for our studio setup was really helpful. So that's a good idea. I like that idea, Robert. Thanks for sharing that. Are you going through this with routings in your course at your site with MixPre? Have a MixPre 10.2 at the way to my man cave. We do talk about routing. It is not as flexible as this, so you cannot reassign inputs to different channels on the MixPre series. But yes, we do talk about routing, especially in the context of headphone routing. So yeah, we do cover that. Okay, that's it for now. All right, let's take a look at a couple more. Actually, you know what? Let's jump to the question and answer the questions that were submitted ahead of time. And that'll take us back to the 888, to be honest. So we will start here. Okay, first question is from Leo. I wanted to ask, and this will be a little vote we can do in the chat here. I wanted to ask how many recordists are recording backups on their sound projects. I'm using a Lectrosonics SPDR. It's a small body pack recorder, basically, on every job. I start the recording on the first take and I let it roll all day. I shut it off on breaks, such as lunch or dinner. Because the SPDR accepts timecode, it's a great choice as a backup recorder. The advantage of letting it roll the entire production day is twofold. One, if for some reason I don't trigger the main recorder because there was no roll cue, I still have a recording. And secondly, I don't have to worry that I didn't start the backup. It's set it and forget it. On the 8 series, I can record AES output, and on the MixPre 10.2, I take right, left, out to the SPDR. So it's a stereo recorder, by the way. Having timecode is a huge plus, but you can use any small recorder, such as a Tascam DR series or Zoom Handy series. So let's take a vote and see who does backup recordings, anything along the lines of what Leo does there, just out of curiosity. I typically don't. Instead, what I do is I record to redundant cards within the mixer. That seems to work okay. I haven't had a failure yet, but in either case, whether the way Leo's doing it or the way I'm doing it, either way, if the mixer goes out, you lose everything. You're not getting a recording. So curious what people out there in the chat, what you're doing out there for backup, if anything. The 888 and the 833 and the Scorpio all have internal recording drives, SSDs, plus 2 SD cards, and you can route the same thing to all of them. So if you want, in essence, 2 backups at the same time you're making your production recording, you can do that. But you can also do what Leo's doing here with an external recorder that's taking audio from the mixer and recording directly to that stereo recorder. Okay, let's move on. We'll come back to are people voting? Does anyone do a backup like that, like Leo's doing?
1 redundant in the mixer, 3 no's.
Okay, 3 no's. 1 saying they're doing it redundantly in the mixer itself, just like I do. So, okay. Thanks, Leo. That's a clever idea. And if you've got a stereo recorder, it's not a bad way to do it.
Oh, we have more.
More coming in. Go ahead and put them up on screen.
Yes, due to. Oh, okay. I don't have a mic. Wait.
Haven't gone that far, but I have wanted to. I don't do backup recording at this time, says Robert. Christopher does it in the Scorpio itself. No external recorder. Single stereo backup mix wouldn't be very helpful in his particular case. I do backup recording due to a scare of failure in the recorder. I don't typically record backups. Sometimes backup with separate recorder, most times not. Keith does. I do use backup slot in the MixPre. Okay, so he's using the thumb drive that does a backup. Never thought of doing backup recordings. Not a big enough outfit. I do backup recording using the Zoom F3. Oh, okay, very good. I do the backup on the MixPres, but it's not really a backup because it just copies the files from the SD card into the USB drive. I think that's a good point on that. That was honestly, I think, a bit of an afterthought on Sound Device's part, because that's one of the advantages the Zoom F series, at least the F4, F8 recorders had dual SD card slots, and that was about those all came out kind of in a similar time frame. And that was one of the criticisms, that Zoom had dual SD cards. The Sound Devices didn't, so they enabled the ability to copy. Once you stop recording, it will make a copy from the SD card onto a thumb drive. That will save you in some cases, but if it's a failure of the SD card, then it's not going to, during the recording, it won't address that situation. So it's sort of a backup, but yeah, we use that as well. Matt says, I use Track E, so that the main lav recording and the shotguns go to the MixPre. Okay. I back up to camera from MixPre out, but realize if MixPre dies, I'm in the ditch. Yes, exactly. Very seldom do mixers record backups unless it's inside the same recorder. Very few dedicated recorders for backup in 2023, and most that have them just back up the mix track. Okay, thanks, Alan. Yes, my recorder has a minus 12 dB safety track to second SSD. Okay, so a little bit of everything, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Good.
People are still adding. So.
Well, we got more. Lots of insights there. Thanks so much for sharing, everybody. Really interesting to see how everybody's workflow goes. Okay, next question is from Trevor. This looks like a request. I'd love to see a review of the Noise Assist plugin for the MixPre 2 series recorders. I've watched the existing Noise Assist video you did, but based on the date of the video, Noise Assist was only available on the higher-end Sound Devices back then, such as the 8 series recorders. I've not been able to find any reviews of the plugin for the Series 2 recorders on YouTube. The video that Sound Devices made themselves was made of an ad or trailer and not a review demonstrating the capabilities when employees on the MixPre 2 series. I've been debating whether I need to spend the $300 for the plugin, given this is mostly a very enthusiastic hobby for me and not my regular day job. Having said that, looking at my MixPre 10 with HiQ batteries and battery distribution blocks, like I said, very enthusiastic hobby. Thanks, Trevor. Yeah, we can do that. In fact, let's add that to. Danny often asks me, did you write that down? Do you have, because like yesterday, for example, I was working on I said, what are we going to cover in the in the live stream tomorrow? And I was thinking about it for hours while I was doing some other things. And finally we came up with the idea here, but let me just do this. I'm going to make a note right now to cover Sound Devices, Noise Assist on MixPre. Okay, it is officially noted. Trevor, thank you for the request. All right, Olaf says, I am wondering, with the Tentacle Sync... One second. What? Oh, okay. Actually, before we move on, but I want to take a look back to Leo's question. Can we go to the Mac, please? To the Mac.
Oh, wait.
Wrong one. Close. To the Mac. That's the one. Okay. So just so everyone's aware, this is the recorder that Leo was talking about. It's a stereo portable digital recorder. That's what the SPDR stands for. It does have a time code input. It can, I believe, you can bring in AES digital audio, so it can get digital audio from the from the 8 series recorder those outputs are also digital outputs. So you're not converting back to analog and then sending it to the recorder and then reconverting it back to digital, which is nice. It also does have a time code jam sync from an external source. My understanding, I don't know that the original was the non-stereo version, which they no longer produce because Zaxcom basically sued them and said you're infringing on our patents. So they discontinued that one and instead made a stereo version, which got around the patents. The original version did not have an internal timecode generator, so it was, yes, it has a timecode port that you could jam to, but you were really just setting the real-time clock, so it would drift over time. So it wasn't a perfect timecode sync, but it definitely got you in the ballpark, if you will. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware. This is the recorder that Leo was talking about, and then of course, Noise Assist. Just for those that were wondering, from Trevor's question, it's a $300 plugin add-on to the MixPre series, and it allows you to apply one instance of Noise Assist in your recording. So you can only apply it, for example, to the left channel of the mix, the right channel of the mix, or to a single microphone input at a time. So it's a little bit more limited. My understanding, Trevor, is that it is actually, we can go back to this view here. My understanding is it's actually the exact same algorithm, but you just have fewer instances you can assign the Noise Assist to process at any given time. But a test will tell us whether or not they've actually, it's different in terms of the quality that it achieves. And my experience has been, it seems pretty much the same. So largely Noise Assist comes down to, some of the examples I've seen out there are if you're close miking like this, it can be more effective because you're already getting a better signal to noise ratio. And in fact, when one of their very first demonstrations of Noise Assist, they did that. They were basically like right up on the microphone like this. And then they had, a bunch of noisy stuff going on in the background. Of course, if you optimize your signal to noise ratio by microphone placement, it's going to be better. But it does a nice job. And I found generally I can apply 3 or 4 dB of Noise Assist. That's how much it'll reduce the noise. So it's not going to totally eliminate it, but it does do a nice job making things a good bit quieter. So we'll take a look at that. All right, now back to Olaf's question. And Olaf's question is, I am working with the Tentacle Sync. So this is a timecode generator. Do you know the reason why the frame rate is limited to 30 while so many cameras have higher frame rates? Greetings from Germany. Well, Olaf, thank you. That's a great question. Let's go to our Mac here. Danny's right on it. Good work. So the Tentacle Sync timecode generator, great little system. You can control multiple of them from your phone and rejam them wirelessly, which is really nice little system. But the question is, why only 30 frames per second? And the answer is largely because the SMPTE, which is the governing body that actually defined timecode in the first place, originally only spec'd it out for up to 30 frames per second. It's my understanding that they're actually working on a newer version of the SMPTE timecode standard so that it will include for higher frame rates. So eventually we'll get there. In the meantime, what you can do is just set your Tentacle Syncs to a factor of the frame rate that you're filming at. So if you're filming at 50 frames per second, set it to 25. If you are filming at 60 frames per second, set it to 30. And that should get you where you need to be roughly. It should still sync within a frame. So it should still be in a good spot. Okay, back over to the questions here. There we are. Okay, next up from Dean. I'm new to audio and not really sure how to ask this in a way that makes sense. It's confusing to me. I have an 833, referring to the sound devices, recorder for ENG shoots, ENG meaning electronic news gathering, with 2 cameras, one for the interviewer, one for the interviewee, a boom, and wireless lavs, the audio going out of the mixer to both cameras via a snake. How do I program the mixer to isolate each input? For example, boom to the left channel, lav to the right channel. I need to monitor the signal coming back from the camera. Okay, Dean, there's a lot going on there. So It sounds like you're trying to send the boom microphone to one camera, or perhaps you're trying to send the boom microphone to the left channel for both cameras and the lavalier microphones to the right channel for both. I'm not 100% clear what you're trying to achieve there, but a few questions. Number one, is the audio that's going to camera production audio? In other words, if you're doing news, is it live news? And if that's the case, then you're probably going to want to send to the camera your final mix and not isolate things, and just isolate, if you do need to make a backup recording, isolate that on your 833. If on the other hand, it's going to be edited, it's going to go through an edit cycle, and you want to send the boom microphone to the left channel and the lavalier to the right channel, then that's where you set up our output routing like we were talking about before. So let's go ahead and switch back over to the 888 and I'll show you how I would approach that. I'm going to, again, mute my mic for just a moment here while I reposition it for me to stand up. Okay. All right, so back in our 833, we would pop into the menus. We're going to come to Outputs. And I'm assuming you're sending a left and right audio feed to each of the cameras. And so what you're going to want to do is configure your left output first. If, for example, you just wanted to send your boom microphone to the left channel, and that was on channel number 1, then I would choose this here. And I'm assuming you're going to want to do that post fader because you're going to be adjusting it as you, as you're mixing during the news recording or live broadcast, whatever the case may be. So that's the first thing. You can send that to your left output. Now we can pop back out. Whoops, I didn't mean to pop out that far. Go back to our outputs, left, right. Now we're going to configure our right output, and we're going to send it the lavalier microphone that we want to send it. Again, I would assume post fader, so you're going to want to press twice so you get it orange. Orange is post fader. All right, so now what you would get is your left output would send the boom microphone to the left channel on the camera, and your right output would send the lavalier microphone on the right output from your mixer to the right input on your camera. Now again, it may be that you're trying to do something more sophisticated than that. If you're also using some of the additional outputs for the second camera and you want to send a different lavalier microphone, you could, for example, still send the boom microphone to the left, to X1 out, which is essentially the left channel of that. And then we could go to the X2 out, which will be your right output, and we could send, maybe you wanted a different lavalier. Maybe you have a different lavalier on channel 3 you wanted to send to that camera. You can do that here. So that's the idea of how you can do that. Usually if it's live, obviously you're probably not going to want to send a lavalier and a boom microphone because they're very likely going to be out of phase from one another. So, all right, let me go ahead and reconfigure my microphone here. I'm going to pause or mute for just a second. Okay, so Dean, thank you for that question. It's a really good one. Let's talk in more detail. If you have more you can share, you can do that. If you're here, go ahead and do that in the chat. Make sure you just label the question with @CurtisJuddAudio, and we'll make sure we pick that up. And if not, if you want to email me, by all means do that, and we can talk through some of the more nuanced details there. All right, our final question is from Andrew, who is in Fiji still. Wow, Andrew, that sounds like an epic honeymoon. Congratulations to you. Andrew asks this: I'd like to know of any tips, techniques, or technologies that might be available to assess and calibrate speakers for a given space. And he says, thank you very much in a language that I'm not going to butcher it. I'm not going to try, but it looks like a really pretty language. So Andrew, thank you so much for the question. So let's hop over to the Mac. I actually do have a suggestion. There are a variety of different tools you can use. So a lot of times what's important to understand is that when you have speakers, near field monitors or speakers in a room, what you're actually hearing is the combination of the speakers plus the room. Because that sound, as soon as it comes out of the speakers, it interacts with the room and the characteristics of the room. So what I think Andrew is looking for here is, hey, what can I do to kind of tune my speakers to get the best results in my particular mixing space, if you will, for example. So we did do a video a little while ago. You can take a look at it. If you do a search for Sound ID Reference and then my name, that'll come up here on YouTube. And we talk about something from a company called SonarWorks, which is called Sound ID Reference. And what it includes is it includes both software and a reference microphone, a measurement microphone. And what you do is you use their software. You connect the microphone to your audio interface, and it tells you where to stand in the room, and it makes a series of sounds out of each of the speakers, and it's measuring the impulse response of those sounds coming out of the speakers and how they interact with the room as you hold the microphone in all these different positions. Something I can't remember. I think it's like 50 different positions or something, or 30. So it takes all those measurements into account, and then it creates a profile that essentially EQs your speakers to play back in a way that's optimized for your room. Now, that does not take care of reverberation. So if you have reverberation in your room, you still need to treat your room with some acoustical treatment. But this is kind of, in my mind, the next step beyond that. And what it did in my particular case is I do have a subwoofer here. So I'm using a couple of Focal Solo B monitors plus the matched, or the subwoofer that is kind of for that set of speakers. And what we found was even when I had dialed the subwoofer down a bit, it was still coming through a little bit on the boomy side. And so what Sound ID Reference did is it actually rolled some of that off in a particular set of frequencies where it was really sort of resonating in my room. And it was amazing the difference it made. Everything suddenly sounded, I still got plenty of nice, rich low end, but it was much more controlled and not as boomy, and didn't shake and rattle your teeth as much, even though Danny says she can hear the subwoofer upstairs when I'm playing it down here. In any case. So Andrew, that's worth taking a look at. There are less expensive ways to do that as well. If, for example, you want to use Room EQ Wizard, it's not exactly the same thing, but it does, it's free, and you can get a measurement microphone and at least measure to understand where the challenges in your room are, where the issues, where the resonances are, and where in the time domain, where certain sounds are sticking around longer than they should be. So it'll create all of these waterfall charts, and they look fascinating. The Sound ID Reference is a lot easier. It basically walks you through step by step and creates the correction curve for you. So it's a lot easier. If you want to save some money and you really want to nerd out, there's also Room EQ Wizard, and I think there's some others out there too. I'm sure in the chat people will share those as well. All right, let's go to the chat. Speaking of which, why are you giggling over there?
I'm not giggling.
You are giggling.
I'm not giggling. I'm chuckling, but I'm not
Oh, chuckling.
giggling.
Excuse me. Danny is chuckling over here in the corner. We're going to take a look at the chat here and see what we've got going on. Clarification. Sorry for the confusion. When I set the headphone level using the tone at -20, I monitor a little high or end up monitoring a little low.
Do you need the original question?
No, that's okay. I get it. Okay, so yeah, I haven't noticed that, to be honest. Yeah, I hadn't noticed that. But it's been a while. I haven't listened. I sold my 633 back in 2020, I think it was. So it's been quite a while since I listened to anything out of that. And I never did it side by side, so I'm not sure I've noticed that. Apologies. Sorry, I couldn't help more. I would definitely get in touch with Sound Devices support. They do an excellent job, so they should be able to help you out there. Does Zoom F6 allow you to record to a USB drive? No. As far as I'm aware, it does not. So you have a USB connection that can connect to a host, like a computer, but not to a USB drive. Okay. Danny has found something that has made her sigh. I don't know what that means. I've used the noise assist on recording on private jets to reduce the jet engine noise, and it works fairly well. Well, there you go. Thanks for sharing that, Matt. And recording on private jets, that's pretty cool. Robert, any comments on poor person time code? Recording a few hours of analog time code, then feeding that analog signal to my recorder and camera using cables. Does it work with Resolve? I would do some tests. Resolve is a little bit funny when it comes to time code. It is the two nonlinear editor apps that convert audio timecode to metadata timecode are DaVinci Resolve and Avid Media Composer. Avid Media Composer evidently does it very well. I've never used it, but from what I've heard, it works pretty well. My experience with DaVinci Resolve is that it doesn't always work. It depends on the camera, partly. If it's a Blackmagic camera, it probably will work, yes. If it's not a Blackmagic camera, maybe 50% chance in my experience that it'll work. So just be careful and do some testing ahead of time. But yeah, I mean, in theory, as long as you test it out and you feel like you're getting good, reliable results, then I think it's a perfectly valid way to do things.
All right.
Okay.
This one has a preface.
This one has a preface, Danny says.
That's the preface.
This is the preface. Sound speeds. Question for you, Curtis. How often do you add meter fluid to your recorders?
And then there's the official version.
Question, meter fluid. How often do you add it to your 888? Never. I never do. And it hasn't thrown a rod yet, so everything seems to be just fine. Thank you for asking.
Okay.
Okay.
That was our comic relief.
That Danny says that's our comic relief for this segment of the live stream today. Thank you, Alan from SoundSpeeds. Hope everything's going well for you. And thanks again for joining us, what was it, 2 weeks ago now? In any case, talking with us about boom poles. It's always a pleasure.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Alonzo, a word of wisdom from our favorite sound guy, Deity TM1 or Tentacle Sync, when a system is better than the other. They're about the same in my experience. I don't know. I think the big difference for me is actually not in the timecode generators themselves. They're both actually quite good. I think if you just look purely specs point of view, the Deity TM1, if I'm getting the model number right there, it can support more timecode generators and groups and stuff like that, and you can wirelessly jam them by using the devices themselves, and they actually have buttons and screens so you can control them. You don't always have to use the app with the Deity. On the other hand, the feature that Tentacle Sync has gotten right that almost no one else has is that they created an app. Unfortunately, it's Mac only because the guy that writes the software is a Mac developer. They have a Windows version as well that's much less capable, but the Mac version of Tentacle Sync Studio is the best timecode syncing software I've ever seen or used. And that's what's, I think, from my point of view, the killer feature that the Tentacle Sync has over the Deity. So if you're on a Mac, if I could only choose one, I'd probably choose the Tentacle Sync. And it's not because the devices themselves are better, because they're not. The Deity devices actually probably are better, but the software is fantastic. The Tentacle Sync syncing software, the Studio software. On the Windows version of that software, all it does is it converts audio timecode to metadata timecode. On the Mac version, it'll do that. Plus, it will also line everything up on a timeline for you, and you can export an XML so you can bring that into your nonlinear editor already synced up. So it's a beautiful workflow. And literally all you do is drag all the audio clips in, drag the video clips in, push a button, and they're all on the timeline. And it's just such an amazing workflow. So that's my thinking on those two. Martin. Wow, it's timecode day. Another timecode technical question. Do you find your boom and lavs are off by a frame or two? And do you adjust this in post or do you leave it for the editor if that's not you? Well, yeah, certainly if there is a post team, you leave it for the editor to take care of all that. Your job is to, I'm assuming you're the production mixer or the location mixer, and your job is to deliver quality audio with a time code in it and let them address it from there. So yeah, you usually would. I don't usually find they're off by a frame or two. I do find that they're out of phase. That's pretty typical. But yeah, I would let the post team address that. I would also work with the post team ahead of time in as much as possible to make sure that you're delivering to them what they are looking for, what's going to make their workflow best. And also make sure that they understand, ask them whether they need a stereo mix or not. Sometimes they just want the isolated channels. Sometimes they don't even want the mix at all. So, and I've actually found that some of the less experienced post teams that I've worked with don't even know what a stereo mix is, and they don't know what they get when they get a poly wave file. They just drop it into the timeline, sync it up, and they edit it, and they just keep everything, and it's a disaster. So make sure that you're delivering to them what they actually want or need. And if they have no idea, then I would just deliver isolated channels. I would not deliver a mix. Okay, Christopher. Dave Ratt's YouTube channel has a bunch of content around tuning, configuring speakers in a venue. He's a legend in live sound. Absolutely agreed. I was just out watching some Dave Ratt on the computer the other day, and Danny walked in. She's like, "Why?" He was talking about compression, and as part of that demonstration, he had his stove set in the mode where it lights, where it's a gas stove, and it was doing that thing where it's going click, 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 and it's to light the gas stove. And he had set a bunch of like insulation material out around the stove to help reduce reverberation. And I was in here trying to figure out what we're going to talk about today, and Danny walks in and she goes, "What are you watching?" Turns out it's Dave Ratt demonstrating how very small differences in mic position can make a huge, huge difference, and how compression can potentially help. And yes, I completely agree. He also has a lot of good information on how to tune and configure your speakers. He comes at it from a live sound reinforcement point of view. So he was the mixer for the Red Hot Chili Peppers on tour, and lots of other big acts. So he's great. Great resource. I'd love to have him on this live stream someday. It'd be really cool to talk to him. Shoji Productions. Do you know about the MixPre 2 live demo and QA June 19th, 11 a.m. Central Time? I had seen news of it. I won't be able to attend just because I have work at that time. But yes, for anyone that's interested in a live demo and a question and answer session, they are holding that tomorrow. So if you go to the Sound Devices website, you should be able to get more information about that. Thanks for calling that out. Film interview question for anyone. What is the most fundamental thing I have to get right to have a nice looking two-person interview? For example, two people who are in a band together. Sit them close. Okay, so you're talking, it sounds like, largely about the visuals. They're not necessarily really close. I mean, that's a strategy that's often used. So if I think of band interviews where you have two people, a lot of times they're sitting on a couch. I think you got to get the lighting right. That's the biggest thing. It's the lighting. Making sure that you're creating a lighting design that highlights them in a pleasing way, puts them in a good light, but also provides some interest in the background without making it distracting behind them. I think that's probably the big thing. I don't know about seating them close. They don't have to be like close. They can be a little bit distant. In fact, if you're thinking about it also from a sound perspective, if you're going to mic them each with their own microphone, if it's going to be a boom, having them sit a little bit apart actually can be really helpful from a sound perspective, but you're probably just going to mix it in post anyway. So I would assume you're going to railroad it and cut out when person A is talking, their mic's going to be live, but you're going to cut out person B's microphone while person A is talking and vice versa. So you get a clean mix eventually anyway, but That can still have problems, by the way. Railroading is not always the answer, but if you do that, you also need to think about room tone and being able to create a consistent room tone. Otherwise, it feels very jarring because the background noise from the two boom mics may be different if you don't set it up right. So that's another thing to consider as well. But those are some thoughts. Matt, I like the Tentacle Sync because the app's better and the Tracky and the Sync are great. Yeah, I've been happy with them as well. Agreed, Matt. I think you'll get good results with the other as well, as long as you already have a software solution. Either you're using a camera, you don't need software, I guess. If you have a camera that has a timecode input, you probably should be fine. But if you don't, if you're going to be feeding audio timecode to your camera, that's where an app in post becomes really, really important. Okay.
Here's the last one.
I'll join you anytime, Curtis. By the way, Deity sent me a boom last week. I am honored that you would be willing to join anytime, Alan. Thank you for that. I'll probably take you up on that again before too long. And I'm delighted to hear that Deity sent you a boom. I think they sent it to the right person, for sure. And thanks for helping out a couple weeks ago when we did that. That was a lot of fun for me. Okay, teachers, I was thinking of visuals, but the railroading issue, room tone difference, is great to think about also. Absolutely, yeah, there's a lot. Things that you learn along the way, mistakes that you make, that I've made. I actually, nowadays, if I'm going to have someone in a pretty tight space, I'll either just sometimes I'll just use one boom mic plus a lav for each of them. And then in post, I'll figure out how, what sounds best and choose from there. But if they're sitting really, really close. What I find is that when they're really close, two microphones, for a live show at least, we did a live stream at work 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago where we had two people sitting close around a table. And we ended up going with a single mic because when we tried to set up the dual mics and the auto mix on the 833, it just there wasn't enough separation and it was a boomed mic out of the frame. And just because of the acoustics of the room, it just ended up working better to use a single mic. So keep your mind open to that possibility as well. Okay, it's time. Danny says it's time. Again, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. In the meantime, get out there, make some great sound, and we will talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody.